Hey guys, welcome back to the Launch Your Real Life podcast, where we help young Christians launch into the real world, figure out how to stand up on their own 2 feet, and fulfill the potential that God is calling them to. In this episode, we're going to continue our conversation that I had with Curtis James, who is the Great Commission pastor at Tate Springs Baptist Church, where I attend. I love this guy. He's great, and he has some really great insights into what's going on in the world of student loans and student debt, especially in the Christian education world that we're living in right now. So, if that is something that you are thinking about, or maybe something you're going through, maybe you're struggling with some of the consequences of taking on more debt than you can chew, or you're just worried about the realities of that when it comes to going into ministry, then I hope that you will find this conversation helpful and encouraging. And with that being said, I hope that you will enjoy and get a lot out of this interview with Curtis James. Let's get to it. Now, a few weeks ago, you happened to mention in the course of our family roundtable that we have at our church that you were working on a research paper. And all I know really is that it involves school debt or debt in general. And so I don't want to try to like give a preview. I just want to open the floor to you to talk about what was this paper you did and why did you do it and what did you find?
I'll share just a little bit about the journey. I've been studying a lot about consumerism and its impact on the church, and how and on our culture in general. So as I began to navigate the impacts of consumerism, one of the things that I came across in my studies was consumerism and its impact on higher education, college and
Mhm.
universities here in the United States, and just the expectations that are placed on institutions and the expectations of individuals, and just the shift that's taken place over the last 30, 40 years in that world as we look at the debt situation. So for me, what I did was I really ended up going down the rabbit hole on this and doing a lot of research and in finding what I think is some pretty concerning things um, about Christian families and debt when it comes to college debt, because
Mhm.
in our culture, college debt is kind of like being added to the American dream of debt. And let me explain myself. When we talk about the American dream, now everybody can define it in a lot of different ways. It has been redefined many times. I'll be honest with
Mhm.
you. It's redefined by consumerism. Consumerism is the driving force that redefines the interpretation of the American dream. But if I say it's real simple, the American dream is to live a free life, to own your own home, to have a job and work and support your family. If we narrowed it down to something that simple, now the American dream literally contains debt. Oh,
Mhm.
well, when I buy a home, I go into debt. Now, I'm not
Right.
saying that it's wrong to go into debt for a home. I understand it's an investment, all those kinds of things, but debt is part of that. I'm going to have a car. Well, most people go into debt for their cars. So I'm going to have a debt. I'm going to have a college degree. And in today's world, for most people, that means I'm going to have debt. So it's this constant acceptance of debt, and I think we need to be very conscious of that as Christians, as what kind of debt are we getting into,
Right.
and how is that, what does the Bible teach us about that, and how does, debt impact us as we walk through it? So I kind of began to kind of go down the rabbit hole. Like I said, I found that $1.78 trillion of debt, of college education based debt, is what we face right now in our country. And that
Mhm.
is immense. It impacts over 42 million Americans. That is unbelievable how many Americans are dealing with education based debt. And that has quadrupled since the 1990s. And when I saw that, I was just like, I don't even know where to go with this. It's literally the largest contributor to, or one of the largest contributors to, the rapidly growing debt to GDP ratio in our country.
Mhm.
And so as we see this, we see that the debt is changing education. But the issue I was coming to was I was looking at it in the light of Christian higher education. And that's where I really ran into this problem. And the problem is, to me, is that Christian higher education claims to embrace this model of theology and stewardship that's consistent with scripture, yet the current consumer driven climate results in this long term debt, which is ethically inconsistent with scripture. And I think that that really poses a problem for Christian colleges and universities. How do we become consistent ethically with what the Bible teaches us about debt in this hyper consumeristic world that we face right now, where consumerism is kind of driving and redefining it? And I think so. That's kind of the challenge that I've come across and have kind of faced as I've walked through this.
Yeah, oh man. I mean, I see a lot of content on this in terms of the broad spectrum, but you focus it in on the Christian aspect of it. Now, a lot of these Christian universities are private, obviously they have to be private.
Hmm.
And that, it has equaled, maybe an environment that's probably debatable too, but an environment that some people prefer for their kids
Yes.
or for themselves. However, what it's not meaning is lower costs, and
Right.
there are institutions around us in DFW that I know people who have, gone 1 year because they thought that was the place to be, and then they go complete their education elsewhere, and yet
Yep.
that's the debt that they are carrying for multiple years. And I mean, what do you think about that in terms of now? Obviously, Christian universities, they a lot of them have all kinds of degrees, so but in terms of specifically, like if you're going to go into ministry, say you want to go into be in full time ministry, um, and yet you go to a private institution that results in a lot of debt that frankly, just looking at dollars and cents, the ROI doesn't seem to be there. What would you say to that young person who's considering that path?
Yeah. So I think that I believe that you can go back and you can look at history and you can look at what Augustine and what Luther and what Calvin thought of Christian education and Christian higher education. And you can see there is a lot of foundational aspects in our history that says Christian education is important. And I actually agree with that. And so I don't necessarily think everyone needs to send their kids to a Christian college, even though there is something you said about where am I sending my kid? What environment are they going into? I think that's a little different conversation than what we're having right now.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a good conversation to consider what's the difference between my kid being salt and light to a dark world in them being in a Christian setting where they're safe, all that. So, so for me, like when I took one of my sons to a preview day at a school or to a preview at a school, it was a Christian university. We went in and we were touring around. Our tour guide said was describing all the amenities and all the activities and all the clubs and all the things you could be a part of. This is a good school, by the way. It's a great school,
mhm,
and it's a good culture, no question. But then he made this comment. He said it's like 4 years of youth camp, and I thought,
mhm,
wow, I just don't think that's what he's going to school for, you know?
right.
I don't is this really what he wants? It was funny, I talked to him afterwards, he was like, "Nope, that's not what I want. I want an education," you know? And so, there's this concept that we're building this utopian-like atmosphere for college
Yeah,
students, for Christian college students, that I think is dangerous, but it's also really, really expensive. And so it's not that these schools are just pocketing money hand over fist. They're trying
right,
to compete and make it in a very competitive world where they're competing with state schools that are getting a lot of government funding and all these kinds of things. So I'm not disparaging anybody in this, but I do think there's a
right.
focus issue. Now, the biggest problem, and there's a lot. If anybody wants the paper, I'll send it to you. There's a lot of things we could talk about, but the greatest concern about this debt is not what you might think. It's actually mental health related problems.
Mm.
Um, and this is specifically true among ministers going into the ministry, young ministers who
Mm.
are walking through this kind of challenge. And so what research has found is a very, very high level of depression and anxiety being the result of this debt, especially in a field like ministry when, one, you're not going to make a whole lot of money. Two, you are trying to lead a church biblically
Mhm.
while managing debt that may not be consistent with what we believe. But when we get into it at 18 years old, 19 years old, we really don't understand that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so, because it's presented as financial aid, every all these loans are financial aid, just right alongside the scholarship and the grant and financial aid. You just check the
Yeah.
box to use it. And so there's a lot of unclear communication that is very confusing and really irresponsible in a lot of ways. In the concept as well, they're adults now. Well, they're 18 years old. They're just getting
Yeah.
started. As believers, as Christian institutions, are we treating them in that way? So, like, I came across Luke chapter 13, verses 28 and 29. I want to read this for you. It says, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all will see it and begin to mock him." That is the shame and anxiety that our
Mhm.
young people who are getting into a lot of debt for school face, especially ministers, when they walk out into their churches and begin to try to lead them effectively. They feel ashamed and they feel anxious because they can't afford to to pay for it. They can't afford to finish it. And they live in this. And that's actually the biggest problem. There was an empirical analysis of graduate theological studies done by Chris Meyer and Deborah Jen, and they found that depression and shame are actually commonplace among ministers who pursued a Christian education in their field. And they find themselves completely overwhelmed, not only by the large debt, but by this shame that they face. And
Mhm.
that is that is a massive problem that now it's an encumbrance for these individuals to overcome. And I think that should concern us heavily as to how do we, overcome some of these things. They need the education to pursue
Right.
this ministry, but are we helping or hurting them with our current model in trying to stay in line with what's happening in the secular education world? And I think that's a really genuine concern that we should think of for the ministers coming up, for anyone graduating with this debt that they've now accrued under the leadership of a Christian organization. And man, there's a lot of guilt, a lot of shame involved that takes years to overcome. And as long as the debt exists, research shows, as long as that debt exists, that shame and anxiety stays with them that entire time. It keeps young people, we talk about a failure to
Wow.
launch and leave the home. It actually keeps young people not from leaving the home because they can't afford it, even though their debt may make them feel like they can't afford it or
Right.
may make them where they can't afford it, but it's actually keeping them from making long-term relationships, engaging in relationships,
Mm.
like, "Oh, I'm gonna get married." Well, nobody wants to get married young. I can't afford it. I've got all this debt. I don't wanna bring all this debt into my marriage. So it's actually keeping people from making long-term commitments in relationships and building depth in their relationships, which means they're more lonely, which means they're more anxious, they feel more shame. And so it's a snowball effect that we kinda don't talk about at all, is that mental health aspect.
Yeah. Man, and just that you said that they carry that not just for a couple of years and then they get used to it, but it seems like you're saying that the studies show that they actually carry that until the debt is gone, as long as the debt's around. And
Yeah,
I've seen clips of people who, still are paying student loans, just talking in general, a couple of decades down the road because of the way their
mhm,
payment was structured or the interest or whatever, that they just could never get rid of it.
yeah,
So, man,
yeah.
that's concerning.
And one of the things that I found in my research, in the monitor on psychology, actually, they actually did an article that looked at savings. In the average savings of an individual in 1982 was 11%, and in 2008, the average savings was below zero. Debt has replaced savings in our country, and higher education debt is one of the primary contributors to that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, man, it's heavy. It's heavy because there, of course, is. I mean, like our church has a culture. All the leaders, we love education. We love,
Yeah,
and we think it's important for Christian leaders to be educated and be equipped. And so it's like, you know, holding these things and just navigating. And that's where I think that there is a gap, maybe with the navigation of like how do we get that equipment and that training, and then how do we navigate debt that sometimes is just a necessary part. Uh,
yeah. I think that one of the most important things that can happen for a young person making the transition into the college setting, there was a mentality for a long time. It actually still exists in our country as well. I want to give my kids everything they need. I want to give them everything I can. It's great, by the way.
Right.
We should give our kids, all that we have as we steward their leadership, on the Lord's behalf. But at the same time, it's led to a lack of education in this kind of situation. Well, we're going to go visit schools, and you pick the one you want. They never really sit down and say, okay, well, this one is going to cost $30,000 a year. This one's going to cost $70,000 a year. And this one's going to cost $8,000 a year. They never have that conversation. The
Yeah.
kid actually is never given the opportunity to process that and look at their parents and say, well, what am I getting at the 70,000 that I'm not getting at the 8,000? You know,
Yeah.
that conversation is never allowed to happen, and that's not healthy. That's not leading our children. So I think it's important to sit down. I remember when my one of my sons was getting ready to go to school, and he had two schools offering good scholarships, but one offered him a really good scholarship, but it was also a less expensive school in the first place.
Yeah.
And we went and visited campus, and they kind of laid out the financial package. And I remember I was sitting down on the bench, and he really liked the other school, I think, better at that time. Ultimately, he was glad he didn't choose it. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. If you go to this school, it's gonna be $27,000 a year, room, board, tuition, books. Honestly, that's under the average in the United States right now.
Right.
So that's not terrible. But the other one was going to be about six to $7,000 a year. And I said, so the thing is, both of these entities are just as respected in your field, in your
Yeah.
ministry field. Um, and so it's not like going to one gives you a leg up on the other. And one program's not specifically better than the other program. So it's really just, am I going to pick this one because I think it sounds better? Um, or is there a more pragmatic approach I should have to this? And so I think that that's just a really, really important conversation that parents need to have with their students. And students, if you're going through this and your parents are giving you the, hey, pick where you want to go. Great. That's a wonderful thing. I'm so glad that's happening for you. And use that opportunity to get an education, please. But I would encourage you to go sit down with your parents and say, "Hey, we're looking at these 3 schools. I'd love to know financially what that means. Are you, mom and dad, gonna be going into debt for my education? How much? Why would we go into debt so much for this one? Or maybe they already have all the money saved up. Awesome. That happens. People have their college funds and everything. That's great. But you still need to know what your education is costing and what others around you are having to go through to get those educations as well. So I would encourage you to engage in that conversation. Hey, I'd love to look at the financial side of these schools and be responsible for that, on your own, both from the parent side and from, the child's side of it.
Yeah, absolutely doing the due diligence, and that goes right back to the scripture you shared about counting the cost. Of
Yeah.
course, that applies to our Christian life in general, but I mean, it's just good advice, with all these decisions that we make. Curtis, thank you so much for having this conversation. You're going to help a lot of people open their eyes to things that maybe they haven't thought of before. Do you have any last thoughts you want to share? I wish we could go into more about your paper, but
Well, I mean, yeah, you don't want to hear the whole thing. There's a lot there, but we do try to offer some solutions for the families, for the institutions, and things like that. But it's hard, and we should never paint these institutions as the bad guys. They're trying to work inside of this context in this world. But I
right,
think teaching our children in general that everything isn't about them or for them would help them understand, hey, this school, maybe it doesn't have all of these cool amenities. Maybe it doesn't feel like youth camp all week long every day. But that's not what I'm there for. Instead, oh, the dorm's not as nice or the cafeteria isn't as nice. That's okay. And I think that's something we teach our children when they're young, in that, having this contentment in what we have and the opportunities we provide. But I also would just my biggest thing is for both sides, communicate. Make sure that you're teaching your children about the financial side of what's going on with their education and that you're practicing biblical responsibility and stewardship toward that as you engage with it. And if you do, then God can work through that and really you'll see amazing blessings. I can tell you from my own perspective, both my kids have graduated recently, and it's a real blessing to see them being blessed by their education, but not hindered uh, by the debt that can come with
yeah,
that. And so that would be my encouragement.
excellent, great. Thank you so much for encouraging the community that's going to be listening to this, and I thank you for your guidance and your leadership in my life. And yeah, thank you for being brave enough to talk to an unknown entity that is this podcast. Uh, I will talk to you later. I really appreciate it, Curtis.
Thanks, Bobby.
All right. Bye.